Hey everyone, this is Brad Keefer, the Chief Revenue Officer at Keen Decision Systems. Welcome to another podcast where we bring in a brand team member to be able to kind of share their story. So again, the purpose of this podcast series is really just to highlight folks in the industry that are coming from different backgrounds and different categories to really kind of empower folks to get their voice out there, to get their opinion out there for all things marketing analytics, marketing mix modeling. Again, Keen Decision Systems is a marketing mix tool that allows for measurement, planning, and optimization. And today I've got Sean joining us from Cabot Creamery. So Sean, welcome in and introduce yourself to the crowd.
Thank you for having me. I've been in this career for about 25 years. Prior to market research, I was in social work for 7 years, and every once in a while we all run into an unruly non-believer, and so that social work kind of helped me work through those moments.
And for the listeners who aren't familiar with Cabot Creamery, tell us a little bit about, what is Cabot?
Cabot is owned by Agrimark, which is a dairy co-op, and there's over 500 family farms from the New England area that are part of this dairy co-op, and they have a board, and they make all the decisions, and they own the Cabot, and it's a cheese brand primarily, although we also have a very healthy cultured business. It's not as widely available as our quiche, but we have yogurts and sour cream and whipped cream and butter and a whole line of things in the cultured section. But we're most known for our dairy cheese, the blocks and the shreds and cracker cuts and things of that nature. But we do some high-end cheeses that go over in the deli section with that are like 5-year aged, 10-year aged. So it's a really interesting place to work, especially from the fact that it's owned by dairy farmers and it's pretty cool to have that.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing on the marketing side that I hear oftentimes, especially with like perimeter store or produce section or deli section type products, is like, I just don't know how much marketing matters. Like, it's a commodity-based price. It's a pricing problem. It's they have all these excuses around like pricing and shopper. It's like, yeah, all those things are important, right? But there's still value in building a brand. So I'd love to get your perspective on like how you guys think about, marketing mix modeling for the purpose of like, do you have to use it to validate the spend? Did you have to get a little bit of this like, no guys, brand is a thing? Or like, where's Cabot sit? Because, oftentimes with dairy companies that I work with, it's just like, the first step is we've got to get beyond this is a distribution and trade only category, and we've got to start to trust that brand building is a thing that's possible in this category, and then use the marketing mix model to measure it. But like, what was that journey like a little bit with Cabot, and like where do you guys sit on that spectrum?
It's been some small steps out of the gate, because really where Cabot sat with this stuff was in black box. They had never engaged with marketing mix modeling. They had some kind of initial engagement through a couple exercise in price and promotion modeling, so they had a general sense of what that was for, and that this was kind of an extension of that, but really geared towards understanding your marketing investments. So there was a lot of education going into it, helping people to understand the value. In terms of how did I sell this in, I focused on, first, that when you have kind of a slimmed down marketing budget, it's absolutely crucial that every dollar gets spent in its kind of optimal place. And some things that I think we had to learn at Cabot that the tool really helped us understand is things like diminishing returns. Just because something's performing well doesn't mean you just indefinitely just keep adding funds to it. There's a point in time where you got to stop. You've maxed it out, and you got to figure out another tactic. So just thinking about concepts like that, and just kind of ROI and payout of things that those can be attached, and so just rolling it out and getting people comfortable with it, I think was really the first step. Our marketing, our SVP of marketing, really, once we got it all sold in and things, they were super excited and are super excited. Our SVP did leave, but she was, a true champion of the tool and getting it in. So yeah.
Who are the like, not specifically who, but like what functions, typically we find that like the functions that are a little bit resistant are for the marketers, right? It's the trade team who's like, they heard we're going to include trade, and that means they're going to cut my trade, and therefore I'm going to lose all my distribution, and they start to play this doomsday, like, and then the TDPs are gone. Like, was it a trade thing, or like oftentimes we hear like the CFO is like, I don't know about this modeling thing, it does a forecast thing. Like, we often hear that, but like the big problem that you talked about is, the change management, right? So the change management is not only in the form of like, hey, it actually is possible to measure impact from a marketing perspective through models. Are they perfect? No. Is there any perfect model? No. But we can be more right than we are without it, right? And then there's the people believability of a model capability, but then there's also the, like, do we have the process? Like, we're a small team, we're a small function. How did you overcome some of those challenges? Because I'm sure you had various degrees of them, right? It's not just like we had to do change, but like, What do you think the big aha was for the organization?
You have to move people away from the mentality that this is a report card on their personal performance. That when I attach an ROI to a media event, that if it's not a good ROI, that agency who ran that tactic for us somehow failed. That's not the purpose of these models. In fact, one of the things that came up was specifically is one data provider didn't want to participate because they'd had bad experiences because they were in charge of coupons. And they've had some bad experiences where coupons pay out low, and they always pay out low. They're expensive to run. They don't have high redemption rates. They are, but there's a reason people still do them. They accomplish other goals. And so, you just because it has low ROI doesn't mean you eliminate coupons. That's not a good idea. It's just that you need to be realistic in how much you want to invest in them. And so really just helping people understand that, we're not, this isn't to judge you or the hard work you do. It's just helping us to better understand the landscape and allocate money appropriately so that, we can do all these things, but not over or under invest.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's, honestly, like the big thing that we always see is like for folks who get hesitant around like that scorecard, it's really more of like, I can actually make your dollars work harder. I can actually make your performance better through interaction effects, right? Like you talked about point of diminishing return. So for those listeners who don't know what that is, right, in every marketing channel, there is essentially a spend where every incremental dollar has an ROI until it hits a point of diminishing return, which essentially means the next incremental dollar you spend will produce 99 cents in return rather than $1. Like that's that point of diminishing return. And you can model this out from an econometric perspective through the Bayesian approach that Keen utilizes. But again, it's like the math can only be as good as the folks who execute, the folks who trust it, right? And then at the same time, there's like this evolution in marketing mix. And I want to highlight the fact that like you've been in this industry long enough to know that, it started with like, where do I put my dollars, into TV, into radio, or into print, or, into FSI, right? It's like it started there through this like spreadsheet based work, which was more maybe even pre-spreadsheet, right? Type of work as far as like being able to model in those spreadsheets. And now you've come all the way to the point where a system like Keen exists where it's like it automates data and it can do all the stuff. It can expose all the priors, and people are like, what are priors, right? So the evolution of marketing mix, like I'd love just like as a nerd in this industry to know like, what are you most excited about that like where we started versus where we are, and like what are your thoughts on like where are we going as an industry and when it comes to marketing analytics on both the technology and the adoption side?
Yeah, that's coming back from the CMA conference. There was a lot of different companies. AI is still huge. It's being talked a lot. I feel like we've hit a plateau a little bit with AI, and it's like, what's the next evolution of it? Because I went 2 years ago, and I felt like what they were talking about 2 years ago was a little bit the same as what they were talking about now in terms of AI capabilities and how they're incorporating it. I could see a role in that specific to marketing mix modeling, where because there are very specific things you need to know. If you had an AI, it'd be like, what's my mean absolute percent error for this model, and rather have to sit and type and go around spreadsheets. If you could have something that was interactive like that, I actually think something like that could be very beneficial to managing marketing mix and getting information out of marketing mix, hey, I want to raise my price 10% at this retailer in June. What's going to be my back half, impact? Or I want to increase my TV budget in this market. How much? Because all those data, all those coefficients are in there. So once you tell it, I want to increase it 10%. It's just the math, and it could say, oh, here it is. You don't have to go in Excel, and it could be a very interactive tool, whereas people are coming to us with very specific questions about impact of changing things. We could literally just engage with some sort of an AI to quickly extract those results without having to necessarily spend a lot of time in Excel.
Yeah, and that's really the one big thing from a Keen perspective is we really appreciate the fact that AI has taken on what it has, because what that means is AI's been around for years, right? And everybody's oh, it's this new thing. It's well, we've been doing AI because we do machine learning. That's how we build our probabilistic models. That's how we forecast and actualize the model, right? So it's that's existed for years. Keen's been around for 15 years doing this, right? So it's existed from the beginning. I think the cool thing for us is it's the interpretation layer, right? So it's the connecting what you were talking about earlier with the change management and the believability of an output of a model. But really at the end of the day, the biggest hurdle, I think, for most marketing mix models, I could have the greatest math in the world, but do I have a recipient on the other end who understands how to interpret the result, who knows how to know when I pulled this lever in the model, the math said that, right? Well, what's the confidence interval with that execution? Should I go do it? So yeah, I mean, marketing mix has come a long way from it's a scorecard that is really hard to calculate. The scorecard can update in real time. We're updating, for some, we have some clients because it's a weekly time series that are updating every 4 weeks, which is crazy, right? Because it's what it used to take to get to that kind of modeling, the computing power. But for us, it's the ability to then say all right, well, we made this change. We executed it, and now we just launched a new feature for forecast actualization, which allows you to then, it auto-calculates the math, where it's hey, the model was off by 2 million units, why? And it's well, if we do the math, it's well, your TDP projection was off by 3%, your category projection was down by 1%, and you also didn't spend in these 3 media channels the way you said you were going to. So therefore, you're trying to say, how come I didn't get that result? Therefore, the model must be wrong. And it's well, no, the execution or the assumption was incorrect. So what we need to work on as the next phase in this modeling is how do we just get better at modeling the inputs that lead to the model of this macro output from a Keen perspective? That's what we're most excited about, as far as a new product launch that just went out actually this week. So speaking of that process, right? So you got the sell-in, you did the change management piece, you got people to believe it. So how do you guys think about this on a monthly, quarterly basis? Knowing there's traditional board meetings that happen on a quarterly basis. There's pivoting that has to happen, but at the same time, there's still this well, we bought up fronts, or we have to lock in a plan. We can't actually pivot that quickly on some of these channels. How do you guys think about operationalizing the output of the plans that come out of our system?
Yeah, we initially wanted to kind of go with quarterly updates. I think this year we may try do it at the beginning of the year, which we're in the process of now, so we can get a 24-23 good view comparison, and help kind of guide our front half of 2024, because I don't think we tend to think quarterly in terms of changing our marketing plans. I think it's more a front half, back half. So then we will want to flip around, into June and run a front half, add the front half in to help guide any decisions needing to be made in the back half. And then we'll flip around and do a year-over-year review again. And I think that's the cadence I'm seeing evolve. It's probably the best approach for Cabot. In the way that, you talked about the future of marketing mix, and this is one of the reasons I really like the Keen system is this industry has been without a marketing mix planner for a long time. I'd mentioned in my late '99, we were working on that marketing mix platform at IRI, and we were trying to build a planner. And I'll be honest, we could not get it to work at that time. Its predictive power was not good when you tried to plug in a plan that we knew had happened and then see what the output was. It just wasn't lining up, and they eventually abandoned it. And they've never really have tried to add that component to their marketing mix models up to this time, and a lot of companies don't have this planning in. You get that 200 page PowerPoint deck, and they're kind of off. Whereas this is a continuing relationship through the planner, going forward. And so, kind of going back to that question, that is, and that is how we are primarily using it going forward. We want the modeling to be fast. We want that to be in and out, done. Because we're more interested in leveraging the planner to make sure that we're in the right ballpark with our spends. And
that's what we continue to hear from the industry. I think the challenge that we've had, just transparently, is that Keen has to sell itself as the marketing mix model because that's the budget that I'm stealing, right? Where it's like, no, that thing you were buying, but it's like, imagine if the marketing mix model could actually say, so therefore, right? Well, that's a whole other category of software and development, which is really called decision science, right? And decision science is essentially part of what's being enabled by the AI boom. So what Keen's been waiting for is for people to actually believe that math could be predictable. And that's where it's and the clients who work with us are like, holy cow, you're actually outperforming the forecast of our CFO, because they're not taking into consideration the long-term ad stock and decays of marketing. And that's where it's Keen's actual tool that we sell is this media planning solution that is a decision science tool that outputs a week-by-week buying plan with a forecast that is more accurate than a lot of CFOs. And the reason we can't sell it like that is if I'm hey, I've got a media planner, people go to ComsPoint, or they go to other is that a reach frequency tool? It's no, it's a econometric-based forward probabilistic projection. And it's not speaking in absolutes, because I think that's the other thing that's been missing with the basic simulators that have come out of other marketing mix tools. They have a basic simulator. It's and then if I do this 2% better, I carry the straight line forward. It's that's also not true, right? Because as you gain this incremental impact on the response curves, all of that stuff matters. But at the same time, it's hard to build those models because the world's changing so fast. So it's not only do you have to have the right forward projection, but you have to have the fact that meta is not the same today as it was 6 months ago, and it's nowhere near what it was 24 months ago.
Yeah.
And that same concept is applying to the category trend, the inflation interaction, the pricing interaction, the consumer interaction with your price, right? All those things need to be built into the model, and that's ultimately what allows us to have that accountability where it's how do you know your measurements right? It's because if my measurement was wrong, then my forecast would be wrong. So I'm creating that accountability. And that's where, it really comes down to us, where it's our marketing elasticity engine, which is taking all the priors that we're able to capture, right? And enough about Bayesian to know that it's is multiplicative Bayesian right now one of the emerging things is well, which type of model? Should it be causal? Should it be, so people are debating all this stuff where it's well, what actually matters? So if I ask you with your experience, being experienced with all these types of models, is it log? Is it causal? Throw out whatever data science keyword you want to talk about, right? What's the advantage of Keen's multiplicative econometric approach with our probabilistic forecasting? From your, the brand side, you don't work for Keen. I can tell you all day why I believe that this is the right methodology, but what are your thoughts? Why does this methodology make sense?
It's been built in a way that, and not being in the code, one of the things that I was really very pleasantly surprised is the sensitivity of the Keen model to actually be able to capture our effects in a total US MULO model. As we talked when we were working out what do we need. Cabot's a small brand, we have a small budget. And so sometimes these line items can really stick out. And so we had to be conscious of that. And, not having to go to the market level to get reads, which is, everybody says, oh, you have to do it at the market level. That's where this stuff occurs. You have to do it. You have to do trade at the store level. Well, I don't know. I'm seeing some stuff now that calls into question whether that's really accurate, and to see. And not only to see the results come through, but I've been doing this a long time, so they had face validity. They just made sense. They looked right to me, so to be able to accomplish that in a total U.S. MULO model and use that so that we don't have to do 64 market models and break everything out into our different price and promoted groups and things like that, which starts to get really complex. And how do you leverage that stuff at that level of detail? That was really what I really quickly realized about your system was the way that it's built is the sensitivity of it is exceptional.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, that's one of the big hurdles we have with folks who've used the traditional consulting-based, MMM platforms, where it's like they've convinced the industry that the only way you can get a good read is through hierarchical models and like all of that kind of stuff, where it's like our challenge with that is like, yeah, but then you're making a lot of assumptions as you roll it back up. And I think that's where they end up, getting the guests wrong as they start to roll up the assumptions. So from us, it's more of a, how do I build it top down? How do I take the top P&L and break it apart? How do I take the spend and break it apart, right? And that's ultimately how we're able to build the model in the way that we are. We're building a hierarchical model. We're just building it differently with a different hierarchy. And that's where we have that advantage. And that's where we've been pleasantly surprising a lot of folks in the industry, because what that then enables is not only better models from our perspective, but it also means it's way dramatically less of a lift, right? Because before, it's like I had to gather 500 spreadsheets in this cookie cutter format to feed this hierarchical model from these DMAs to then add it all up. And it's like, I just need working dollar spend by week by channel. And it's like, you could just do an export from Meta, like through the API, right? And it's like, for most folks who've had like legacy experience in this, it's like, that's like mind blowing of like, but if I just give you spend only, you can't possibly build a model. And it's like, you need at least clicks, or you need clicks and impressions, and you need all this grain. And it's like, you actually don't, right? So that's where we often like, hey, I'll give you a free model, right? Like, let me prove it to you. And then it's like, wait a minute, like this is actually believable, and things like that. But one of the things that you mentioned in our communication before recording this was that consumer level marketing mix models are coming up. I'd be curious, does that essentially mean like, how do we use our marketing mix model by retailer to be able to do like true cost to customer, like channel level retailer? Or what are your thoughts? Is it more consumer, like audience level modeling? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a little more like the audience level modeling, which, again, we market it. We have to run these at a market level because that's where we buy the media. But markets are made up of a lot of disparate groups who consume that information very differently. And I've always wondered, and you'd have to have the data. The data is always the challenge with this, is when you get into consumer level models, where you're like, well, how do men versus women react to these different tactics? If my core audience is women, then I need to be doing this and not this, because there's and all that stuff kind of gets blended together in a market level model. And I've often wondered, age cohorts, millennials is a big thing. Well, can we do marketing mix models which really forgets about the geography and really focuses on the consumer type? And you could use a whole bunch of demographics to look at whether certain tactics have good payouts versus others when trying to maybe reach Hispanics. With your messaging. And so I've always would love if we could eventually, and I think there's survey and segmentation and the other stuff. I just really believe in, regression and marketing mix to really pick up these nuances and deliver some good results.
So that, just for the audience, that wasn't a setup to be able to say that's awesome because Keen believes the same thing. The challenge has always been the data. So from a hierarchy model perspective, that's how we start to think about things. So we have a full hierarchy capability where I could measure by audience, by cohort, to be able to look at the P&L by each individual breakout. So we have that capability. We've been testing it with some agencies and some other players who have some of the cohort information, but it's not the modeling capability that doesn't exist. It already does within the Keen platform. It's the data, right? So how available is the data? Well, the audience data is there, but what isn't there? It's revenue, right? How do you then know what the revenue is for that to be able to true it up? Because I could look at total MULO and then how it breaks down, but what is that cohort revenue specifically? Like, there's not good data there. And the data that exists there at that level is either some kind of attribution, which I'm then taking attribution, which is imperfect, to put it against the POS scanner total MULO data, right? It's the same way. It's like, then the other thing is you have panel-based data, but the challenge in modeling from our perspective is when you put absolute scanner data with panel data, you're now meshing methodologies that aren't intended to be meshed, right? How do I take absolute data and model it with directional data? So we're kind of playing around with that. It's no different than the way in which we model, brand awareness as the outcome metric versus revenue. Is there a causal relationship between those things? Just like, is there a relationship between panel versus POS data? Because, you kind of look at these different methodologies. So, that's stuff that our R&D team is actively working on, because it's in the same bucket of like what we're calling ecosystem modeling, which is more in this like even like the owned versus earned debate. Like, all of that stuff is kind of in that bucket of like, really, how do we slice the model up as much as we possibly can? We do channel level modeling today, but it's that next level of that buying behavior that we want to disrupt on the planning side. So that's really exciting there. So I'd say, as we wrap up here, what are your big things that you want to kind of tell folks who are in the industry? So whether it's, that new person that's breaking in, like, what do you think's the key? Now that you're seasoned in your career, like, if you're telling someone new coming into this space, what are you telling them? And then what's your hot take on the next big thing that you'd love to see kind of, disrupt the industry?
I would say that when it comes to this, find your champion right out of the gate. Find somebody who's a decision maker, who is going to be dialed into this stuff and is going to like it, because that will greatly, increase the probability you can bring the technology in, keep it in the organization. So seek out a champion, someone in senior leadership, somebody who has some say in budgets, and engage them early and often in the process of marketing mix modeling, because they will then have the ability to push it out to the rest of the organization without getting a lot of pushback. So that would be one of my biggest recommendations to anybody who's thinking about bringing this into their organization. And the second thing is just also, as you start engaging, especially agencies, just continually assuring people what this is and what it isn't, so they don't get scared that somehow they're gonna, lose the contract because the ROIs didn't, line up. Just try to remove some of that fear that this is really about optimization and not assigning a grade to individuals in their job. Awesome. I will say one other thing about that you're doing that is missing and was huge for Cabot was your ability to provide us with proxies. What do you do when you want to maybe start investing in a tactic that you've never invested in? How do you figure out what money to put it in? Is you put $5 million in, you put $500,000 in, and we looked at some of that, and Keen was really helpful in letting us use some proxies that you had developed into a library, and we could put into the planner to point us in the right direction. Just give us a general sense of like what's too much or too little and stuff. So I definitely that was a huge piece of this as well.
Awesome. Yeah, so to recap, it really sounds like at the end of the day, it's like go find a champion, figure out how to sell in the solution. When you sell in Keen, what it's really going to unlock for you is the ability to validate some of the thinking. But really, the big unlock seems like it's the ability to build better plans, right? To know, like, here's the direction we're going to go, to be able to validate that through time. And along the way, it's like there's change management in regards to telling folks like, hey, it's not a scorecard that's going to threaten your role or your budget or any of that. But at the same time, it's, taking that champion who's going to say, we're going to make better database decisions here's the database decision from a buying planning perspective that Keen has enabled. And then ultimately we're going to hold ourselves accountable to the right metrics, which is we're all trying to grow, the most profitable brand that we can for the sake of our shareholders, or in this case the farmers and the co-ops, right? Where it's like they're trusting you with their raw product to turn it into a consumer product to put food on the plate of their own their own families. So at the end of the day, I appreciate the work of Cabot. If you haven't tried their white cheddar, my kids love it. So especially like the cracker bites, like the pre-cut squares. They love that. So the white cheddar from Cabot Creamery. But Sean, ultimately, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you sharing your time, your story with us, and your partnership at Keen. So I appreciate you coming on.
And let me throw out one last nugget.
Sure.
As people are going, collect the data that demonstrates how this tool pays for itself. I mean, that is crucial. That will be my last recommendation is just as you go, collect the data, because they do. Mm-hmm. I mean, but you got to prove. Sometimes you got to prove it. But this has been great. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Sean. And for those who are listening, feel free to tune in for the next one. We're going to keep this series going with a few others. We've got some folks from Chomps coming in. We've got some folks from some other brands that you're familiar with. So I appreciate the opportunity to continue to talk to the market about some of the new and disruptive ways that Keen is delivering for marketers. So I appreciate the time again, Sean, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.